of Debt Nation. I'm your host, Steel Archer, and we are busy putting death out of business. It's a really good job. I love waking up to my job every day and helping to assisting with putting death out of business. It's great. And I'll tell you what, if you want to live a longer, healthier, happier life, get yourself some Thrivous. You can either go to the store and get some, the online digital store, and buy some, or you can share the link in the episode description. You can follow the rules, and you know what to do. And you're gonna win some Thrivous. It's the best deal on the internet. It's free money just for the Debt Nation fans. So this episode of Debt Nation is being sponsored by Thrivous, the human enhancement company. Thrivous is giving exponential gifts to Debt Nation fans. Each gift starts at $5 and goes exponentially to $160 based on the number of fans that share the episode of Debt Nation within 24 hours. Check out the rules in the bottom in the description. Kevin, you can also enter that competition. You can enter that competition every day, starting from right now. That's a competition that's going live right now, and you can also enter that competition. So get yourself some Thrivous. I also want to thank David Kelly for sponsoring this episode of Debt Nation with his I Am Transhuman campaign. The I Am Transhuman campaign, doing a very strong job there, promoting transhumanism. Fantastic. Thank you very much, David Kelly, for all of your hard work. Now we have here Kevin Kane. Welcome to the show. You're the superstar of the show today. It's really, really good to see you. Look, first, let's open up on the salvo. You have had a really interesting life, you know, going around the world a bit, going to Korea, South Korea, probably not North Korea, probably not hanging up there too much. But no, going around serving in various things, running for things. I'll let you explain your life. Open up on the salvo of your life, Kevin. It's really, really, really great to have you here. And I'll tell you what, I can feel it already. I can feel it in my bones that you're going to be a regular person on the show. You fit right into the trajectory of Debt Nation. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you for having me. Well, I guess where do I start? It's a really long life, so I will just keep the short, sweet parts and omit some of the juicy ones for another show or when I'm prepared. But I had a scholarship at 18 for university, and I chose instead to go for the Army because I could get another scholarship and have two. And I also didn't trust myself to become a fantastic person without forcing myself through that hardship. So I decided to delay gratification. As much as I didn't like waking up every day at 5:30 a.m., I thought, who I am today is not important. Who I want to be 10 years later is. And that was always my mindset my whole life. The present is not important, as is where I want to be 10 years later. So I sacrifice now for later, including for going out and enjoying myself. So 7 years or 6.6 years in the Army, honorable discharge, everything was great. And I finished as a non-commissioned officer, preparing people for the Iraq War and other things when I got out in 2005. I ran for State House representative in Georgia while an intern at the Carter Center, where I met President Carter, and while a student, and mostly a student at Georgia State University. And so there I had a scholarship and I had a GI Bill military paying for my education. And when I graduated with a political science degree, wasn't a lot of interesting economic opportunities in 2007, just before the financial crisis. So I went overseas to South Korea, and I lived there for 10 years. And there I was the first American to ever work for the Korea Energy Economic Institute. That's like their version of the EIA, Energy Information Agency. And I was I focused on econometrics and oil analysis. And that is because I had finished a master's degree from Seoul National University. So that's like Peking or Tokyo, mostly very nationalistic, somewhat centered right-wing kind of oriented university. and because it's the best school you can get into in the country. And so it's very competitive. Usually I was the only non-ethnic Korean in my classes. There were some CCP Chinese members and some others as well on these kind of special programs to exchange. And so that was to study international relations theory in graduate school, which is like foreign policy and the future of the world as countries relate. Studying with these people is really eye-opening experience, because you're talking about the most sensitive, don't discuss topics with the people that actually matter. You know, they come from working for the president of Colombia too. Those are my classmates, but mostly from the developing world. So that shaped my experience a lot living in Korea and working with them. And there I started a systematic hedge fund that was machine learning driven. People said, you can't do it. You have no experience. You don't know anything about this space. You never started a tech company. You can't code. And my attitude was, F you. I'm going to do it anyway because you don't decide anything. And we were trading with $40 million with, I said it about 3 months, but probably the real number is somewhere between 6 months of only track record. And that was before live. So you can do anything you would like. Never listen to a thought leader about what you cannot do. So a lot of people will tell you cannot do something because they're projecting onto you their own capability. But intelligence and our way forward is complicated. There is no predictor, I think, of who will succeed or not in this regard. Grit and determination are above all. Of course, you need aptitude. And then after that hedge fund, it kept running, but I left to start a semantic analysis firm that came from some experience while we were live with our system. That it seemed that, I won't go into too much detail, but so that semantic analysis firm, our team was picked up by a 22-year track record hedge fund, and that's how I ended up moving here to Seattle. So our team moved here, and our strategy still run today for them that we built. I left because I was in Korea when every living South Korean president is in prison, except for the city. And I was there in the middle of the protests and the mess and studying with the daughters of their ambassadors and stuff like that at school, and realizing that, at least coming from the US, that their concerns about freedom of speech is nothing compared to what the rest of the world is facing. You know, just the opposition just raid all your offices the next day with, you know, the authority of the government and the police, and take everything and all your computers. So it's kind of it's a democratic system, but there is a winner-take-all component that is very Machiavellian. And there's still a massive corruption in Northeast Asia and in China and the rest of them as well. But because it's a saving face culture and system, they realize there's a huge economic benefit to not sharing with the rest of the world the failures, because then investors have confidence that it's a good place to put money in. But when they go in, of course, they lose their shirts, because image does pay off when you are being deceptive about your failures. Whereas if people go in the US, they kind of have a very good clue about what they're going to be in for, because here people are pretty open about their failures. And the government's extremely open, right? We air it on the dirt. So there is some authenticity in terms of expectation setting. And when a market is not authentic, you can be set up for disappointment in terms of expectation. And I kind of started shaping these views of that system. I've personally been the subject of industrial corporate espionage and threatened. While I was in Northeast Asia, I've had someone in a boardroom tell me, you will give me a copy of your code or I will do something. And then they listed what they would do, which involved permanent damage to my career and my life. And so as a result of that experience, I really became committed to defending startups and people, humans, no matter who they are. No one should be treated like that, no matter their nationality. Doesn't matter whether you come from a colonial or post-colonial or a developing or post-authoritarian, whatever. Everyone has the right to not have that happen to them. And the origins of your society are irrelevant. It's just the present that matters. So after I left the hedge fund, we started working on network security. And I wanted to serve startups, wanted to serve individuals, and I wanted to make sure that in the process of democratic development, and in private capital formation for investing in companies, that process is not tainted by corrupt governments, is not tainted by spy apparatuses that are used to steal that information. And this has become my co-founder, Andrew McElroy, and some of our other colleagues, former Navy SEAL Scott Brower, are working with us in our network security company. This is our mission. And in the process of doing that, we developed some really cool technology, like we can prevent throttling from slowing your download speed and this kind of stuff. So we're rolling out our first product in the Google Play Store. It's AMBIT VPN. It's utilizing post-quantum encryption and a newer protocol. And that post-quantum encryption is a big claim, but that is what is established by the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US government. And they have qualified what is a post-quantum encryption algorithm. And we follow their standards, and those are the ones we are using.
Wow.
So that is a short spin of my entire life to how I arrived exactly where I'm at. But I left out all the details and all the fun stuff.
No. We'll save the fun stuff for another show. There's so much to go on there. In communication, listening skills, self-control, positive attitude, assertiveness, conflict resolution, empathy. You know, we've got to stop calling them soft skills. I think these are essential skills. I think there's a mismatch in the language there. I think these are really, really important, and I have to thank Americans for their free market preaching, because you don't see that many. You see a few Australian entrepreneurs popping up here and there across the world, and for our population, we do punch above our weight, but we don't really have. We have a more relaxed attitude towards entrepreneurial ventures, towards really shoving yourself out there. And I was exposed to a lot of sort of American free market ideology, so to speak, where it's a little more dog eat dog. And I learned a lot from that type of thinking. So I do understand this notion of being an American capitalist, so to speak. And the sort of nature that involves, and also a huge amount of respect for the system of capitalism as well. This free exchange, and there is points where the government breaks down. There are treaties. The United Nations has a lot of different intergovernmental panels and organizations that are set up to fight corruption and to fight online terrorism and catfishing and a whole host of problems, cybersecurity problems, whatever. And but they do fail. Governments are a long way behind on the tech scene, and government enforcement falls really, really through the floor. And this is where the free market, has to come in. A lot of VPN companies, third-party antivirus software, etc., are very important. Although you've got to watch out with those guys as well, because just like Facebook and Twitter and these big social media giants, they also collect your data and sell it off as third parties. There's been a lot of different sort of companies in that space that have managed to do that. So so quantum computing is the big one. Quantum computing, we're staring into a black hole there, because with quantum computing, it's going to be able to break down pretty much all of the encryption mechanisms and the security mechanisms that have been in place, because computers aren't currently powerful enough to break a lot of the encryption. So explain to us how your VPN is it connected to a quantum computer? Why is the word quantum in your VPN?
Okay, so I will stick to the areas where I'm comfortable and not speak about areas that I cannot defend. And you should bring on our chief technology officer if you want to get into cryptography. However, so quantum computers, there have been some reviews of what kind of attacks they could carry out to break encryption. And the National Institute of Standards and Technology, for the US government, spent 10 years reviewing this, and they're going on another phase 2, I think, review of this. some categorization like that. It might not be called fakes. So it's an active area of research for the United States government and for our research institutions. And the idea is that at a certain qubit of capability for a quantum computer, not a simulated annealing, but a pure quantum computer, can crack encryption with certain attacks. And this is essential because to go ahead and prepare for now. So post-quantum means that, not, so I want to qualify, it's more like post-quantum. This is our own view at AMBIT Inc., not necessarily from other organizations, that you have to add a shelf life, economic life to any encryption algorithm. So there is no encryption algorithm that we are aware of in the world that will work for the next 100 years and keep it locked. So maybe we imagine that for up to 1,000 qubit, the current algorithms that we chose for our encryption cannot be decrypted by a quantum computer, right? So at least for the foreseeable future. It is really essential to get off TLS encryption standard for VPNs and other things. I think that it has a really long history. We built a timeline of just a problem after problem. The Chinese government forged the Google certificate. So TLS also can utilize certificate authorities, and it's important to manage your trust store, but a lot of organizations don't. Obviously the Chinese government is not a trusted party because they just got in trouble by the FBI for carrying out the Equifax hack. Therefore, they cannot be a trusted party because they are mixing state interest with the private sector. So that's where they choose to make their battleground and getting in and putting their, government agenda hands in the private sector, which I think should be hands off. Because otherwise, on a longer timeline, as people replay the prisoner's dilemma, they'll change their behavior. And tit for tat is also a losing game. So for so-called long-term thinkers, they have very short-term behavior. That is a losing game.
Yeah. Let's talk more about China. So you've got this emerging superpower, China. It's essentially a third world country that's masquerading as a superpower. It's owed a lot of its enormous growth and what it is today to a lot of tech theft. It's stolen a lot of technology off the United States. It's not a very good innovator. This is a lot of copyright fraud, intellectual property theft, and because of the nature of the way that its state-owned enterprises are set up, things like Huawei. These are 5G, the 5G stuff, whatever. These are all arms of the CCP. They're all bureaucratic. They masquerade as private enterprise, and they worm their way into, because America. This is what I mean. The American government enforces a free, fair platform of trade in a certain way. It enforces the Bretton Woods system mainly, but in other mechanisms as well, through the WTO and other mechanisms, IMF, etc. It enforces a free, flat, fair playing ground of trade and says everybody can play on this, good luck. And America gets its advantage from the fact that it has the US dollar, but that's the only real super advantage it has. Otherwise, otherwise, it is fair, it is free, and they do use that money to enforce free, fair trade. Now, you can use subsidies, of course, but it's still private. You can still sue if you're a collective of citizens. You can still sue Google. You can still sue Facebook. You can still sue Coca-Cola. You can still sue Shell. The government can sue. There's a separation of powers. The Chinese system does not work like this. These companies, for example, Huawei, are enterprises of the government. So if you go up against this entity, you're going up against the whole country and specifically the CCP. And this is one way that it's been able to worm its way inside and do a lot of the technology theft. Let's talk more about China. Is it a concern?
I think this sounds cliche, but I've been to China and I've done business there, and so have my friends. And I think I really love for the most part, the capitalistic spirit of Chinese people. I think it's really unfortunate that CCP takes credit for something it didn't do. The CCP didn't lift one person out of poverty. The Chinese people did that themselves by pooling their taxpayer dollars and reinvesting it as private capital into some public companies, which is a model that they did not invent. That model came from South Korea and Japan and Taiwan. So that's why they were labeled as tiger economies, because they had a slightly different approach of efficient capital use pooled to reinvest into their private companies or public companies that eventually became private. So the Chinese model is not remarkable. It's quite common in that region. South Korea grew, if the US grew at South Korea's economic rate, which is not a realistic comparison. There are a lot of nuances, but let's just hold that for constant. From 1972 to 2019, I think the average income of the US household would be about $72 million if they grew at their rate. And South Korea did that without natural resources, which China has. So I think South Korea's success is way more remarkable than China's, because they did it in a completely resource scarce regime, and they are a democracy, which is a model that China will eventually follow or fail. And that is to become a representative country, so that those people whose taxpayer dollars they use in China get credit for their own success, not the CCP. The CCP is the threat, not the Chinese people. Sure, there are systems in place that have to be improved in terms of representing IP theft, but eventually the Chinese people will see that to their benefit, or people will stop doing business with them. I think the biggest mistake is this kind of slave mentality that you see a lot of Westerners have. They behave like slaves and not independent thinking people, and they just give up and say, well, to get market entry, what are you going to do? You just give it up. Well, actually, it's a privilege to be a member of the WTO, and no one has a right to. So because China is a member of the WTO, you have a right to not have your stuff stolen. Otherwise, take them out of the WTO. There should be a carrot and stick, because it's a privilege to be able to trade. Unfortunately, also a lot of CEOs are employees and not owners. And that's a hazard, because if they give away all of the IP in exchange for market entry, they get a bonus, they get great earnings, and they get a pat on the back, and then 10 years later, the company's left with an empty bag and nothing. And the owner would never do that. An employee would, because they can move on. And that's one of the hazards we have of having employees, not owners, running some of these companies. I'm a big fan of pure capitalism and equity capitalism. I think it's essential that people have something to lose if the company fails. And by lose, I mean more than they started out with, like your savings or your retirement and those kind of things. It's important to have that view. I have a very, I believe in delayed gratification. I believe that the best rewards come from the hard route, not the shortcut. And in the long run, that will pay off. It just sometimes takes time, and in the short term, it looks like cheating will win. But like I said, in a prisoner's dilemma, the other party will learn to tit for tat or go metaphysical in the game. And that's my view. It's a very abstract view, but look, CCP didn't raise anyone out of poverty. So the people pull their tax dollars to a central body, which every country has, and these construction companies, engineering, did joint ventures with South Korean and Japanese and other companies and learned the blueprints for smart city planning and apartment development, and they worked together. But those names have all been erased from their development story. The real story of China is how the world came together to work with them, to develop them. The CCP should get credit for nothing other than making some PowerPoint slides and pointing in a direction. But if that's doing something, then it's new news to me.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah, China is a big old country. You don't give the Chinese government any credit for setting the conditions into motion where they accepted capitalism, this quote unquote open door policy.
Sure. Credit for that and the other 200 countries in the world that do the same thing. I don't know why that's remarkable. But yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, because China. I mean, it's remarkable in the sense of China, because China's always been a closed country to the world. They built a great wall to try and keep everybody out. It's remarkable in the fact that that they've always been closed, and that they decided to open up themselves to the world because they had the error of shame, right? Because every time they would open the doors up to the world, the imperial powers, whether that's be the United States, Japan, England, France, whoever, would come in and they would harass them, and they didn't like that. So So,
Well, I want to clear a couple of things. The U.S. has never been an imperial power. It never occupied and raped and pillaged a country and took their natural resources for their gain. There have been many people in the U.S. to sound that drum, but they've never been in power. So, because it's a free in society and people are allowed to say what they want. But, so the U.S. never as a country or as a national character, is not responsible for anything in China's history of meaning.
what about
or
the
impact.
Boxer Rebellion?
You know, I understand there are a few Americans who are involved in that, but I think that that's a little bit of stretching the truth. Yeah.
All right,
I
continue.
don't think that someone in the White House came together and said, let's act like a colonial power and prevent them from developing. And I said there was no 100,000 American soldiers marching on Chinese territory and saying we're putting our flag here, right? So I think
Arguable.
it's a bit of a stretch. Well, I think that some people who are racist group everyone who is from Europe with Americans. You know, I have an Irish heritage, but I don't know the first thing about it, and I don't share a common identity with it. So, you know, but if you look you know, not Chinese, maybe people think that they're all the same. Obviously, they're not. I mean, I experienced that a lot in Korea. So people would say to Australians, "Are you American, or are you, you know, are you German?" And I don't know anything about Germany, and I have nothing culturally in common with anyone from there. Yeah, I just want to make that point clear.
All right, cool.
But I think some people gloss over that, right? And they just lump everyone down in the same history.
Well, yeah. Well, the reason they call it the century of shame is because, you know, they don't want to remember it because they think of themselves as being occupied, whether or not you say that's true, or others who agree with you say that's true. That's what they say, and that's what they think, and that's the propaganda that's coming out of there, and that's from both. That's from both governments. That's from both governments. That's from Taiwan and from the nationalists and from the Communist Party. They both agree on that, just like they both agree with the 9-dash line. Like they both agree, Taiwan and Beijing both agree that the 9-dash line was historically true, when everybody else in the whole region and the world disputes whether that's a real thing.
I think, you know, I heard a great expression from a friend of mine when I was in Korea. And the argument, first of all, 100 years ago, everybody was poor in the world. So I think that sometimes we like to make fancy stories around certain countries because people like to rally behind the underdog, which is perfectly acceptable. But everyone was poor 100 years ago. And, you know, the U.S. was recovering from, you know, still had segregation and still had to deal with a lot of things. The U.S. had plenty of trauma inflicted both by non-Americans and by their own people amongst themselves. So I don't understand why there is a special focus globally on their case in particular. There are many others that I think will be emerging and fascinating.
Cool. Yeah, let's talk about being a hedge fund in China, or your hedge fund career, because this is another exciting side of the world, international finance and capital flow, investment flow. You know, so what? Firstly, everyone, break it down for everyone, because we talk about hedge funds a lot. But, you know, firstly, what is it like? What is a hedge fund? And then what is it like being involved with the hedge fund? And then what is your story on the hedge fund side?
Most hedge funds fail. So about 40% of startup hedge funds fail within 4 years, and those numbers can be changing. That's what it was 10 years ago. I think it's harder than starting a tech company because you have to no investor will give you money to build anything in that space. But it's all software, it's machine learning, it's, you know, handling a massive amounts of data and some serious architecture and software engineering. But no one will invest in you to build anything in that space. You have to basically build and get the capital to work, and the code in that space cannot have any errors, because, you know, any kind of tiny error can bankrupt your company or hedge fund, or put you in a legal risk, right? So it is extremely stressful if you're in a quantitative hedge fund. There are thousands of people with PhDs that wipe out in a graveyard and go back home and do something else in this space. So it's kind of making money and trading as art as much as it is a science. And what I mean by that is, if we go to Pratt Art Institute or a famous art college and tell them, I will pay you $1 million to make me a masterpiece, maybe all of them fail, right? There is no clear metric that we can use to know someone will be successful at it. And the same thing in the hedge fund space. You cannot look at someone's resume and the pedigree in school and know that they will be good. Investors often give money to people who come out of bulge bracket investment banks and their money wipes out because it's really hard to have a predictor of who will succeed or not. It is an extremely difficult space. And that's how it goes. Hedge funds are different than proprietary trading, where you're trading just in in money invested in a company and you're not going to raise any more money outside. So proprietary trading, like if you work at a well-known HFT firm, your return expectations are about 100% a year. And that is extremely doable for that level of skill set, despite what other people might know. But they're engaged in short-term arbitrage and other things. And their return horizon is a couple of years before the strategy stops working. So the idea is to make as much money as possible, turn 10 million into 100 million in a couple of years and then call it a day and do something else, or change strategies or start expanding and bringing in more strategies and expect that turnover. In the hedge fund space, that kind of behavior is generally not accepted because the holy grail in the hedge fund space is to manage the pension fund capital because there's a whole lot of money. And instead you make money on the size of the assets. So then your strategies are very different because those pension funds don't take the kind of risks that you would with a short-term, strategy that you're cagey about disclosing the details for. So hedge funds are much more wearing suits and being presentable to teachers and other pension funds, and you hope to represent their money inevitably and manage that money. And that's kind of the objective of that space. And it's very, very painful and it's very difficult and the standards are extremely high. And I've seen grown gentlemen cry in that space because of being humiliated before a due diligence team from a major pension fund. It's hard, and there's only I think a limited number of people in the world that are very good at it. And by limited, I mean probably quants that are good in that space are less than 10,000 in the world.
Wow, yeah, and how did you get into it? How did you think that getting into hedge fund? I mean, did you think because you had the military training? I mean, what type of mind does it take? Yeah. What's the headspace that you have to get into? Is it a greedy thing to do, or is it a selfless thing? How would you describe it? How would you describe the actual mindset of the whole deal?
I think that you can have a lot of different motives. What I've learned over the years is don't judge someone for their reason for doing it. The question is whether they succeed or not, and if they succeed, that's their right to be there. I've always had that attitude. When I was a short track inline speed skater, so inline speed skating, it's indoor, and a lot of people who do short track, I start there, including Apollo Ono. So in that space, I used to sometimes meet skater. I was mediocre, so I had to train very hard to make it, and I made it. The best I ever did in my career was make it to tryouts for Junior Team USA, which was not small. And in that process, I met skaters who, with 6 months in being in the sport, would be better than me. They were just gifted, right? So I always found that amazing. I always found talented people amazing. I didn't take it with insecurity. I took it with, I want to be his relay partner. So when I met someone who was better than me at something, I didn't take it as an offense or a threat. I took it as an opportunity. And that's my superpower for me that worked for me. As they say, find your superpower. When I meet someone who is better than I am, my first thought is, how do I leverage that for something for both of us? So the other thing is, someone might ask me like, what gave you the courage to do it? Honestly, I never really thought about it. I just think about the goal and that's it. And what else is there to talk about? So it's kind of like when I was in the Army and you're on a 20-kilometer ruck march with 45 pounds on your back and you've lost a toenail from the march and the weight and not changing socks. And someone starts talking about like your rucksack being heavy, or they start talking about, this is not fair. And everyone's looking at them, why are you talking? The only thing to think about is the goal. Why is there something else on your mind? I don't understand. And I've always had that attitude. There is the goal and nothing else exists, including the people around you at the moment. Like you care about them, but everyone's mind has to be on the goal and nothing else. And it's really important if you're going to build something like that, that you work with people like that. If they start wondering who got more M&Ms or who has a nicer desk, first of all, that you should not work with them, right? It just already you're starting your relationship off with caring about things that are moot points. You want to make $100 million. You don't care whose desk is bigger. What's more important to you? And it's really important to have a long view if you're going to build a business like that, that you want a company that has $1 billion market cap. What the hell are you doing talking about your desks? Like, and military people have always had that attitude. Like, how come you can be so, like, without capacity for delayed gratification and petty? And petty people usually don't make it very far in that space because it requires such patience and strength mentally.
This is a little bit of a side point, and I didn't really want to go down here, but now you've got me thinking. In America, you hear, especially on the campaign trail, a lot from the Republicans and from the Democrats. The big talking point is veteran healthcare, veteran issues. There's a lot of veterans, especially in places like Hawaii or Florida, a lot of homeless veterans and stuff like that. What can Americans do? Because there seems to be a big talking point in America. Is it just the lack of funding? Is it mental health? Is it a lack of military support? What's the issue there? Why is there so many homeless vets and veteran problems? Obviously, there's a lot of trauma involved with military service, and that's got to be a huge factor. But is there any solutions, and can technology and AI help? Is there any startups? Obviously, you might be connected to this issue. We do talk about it a little bit, but I want to know what Kevin Kane's analysis on this is.
I cannot speak to the problem. I can only speak to my experience with the VA hospital and being a veteran. I can tell you my journey. That was the hardest change for me. I think that when you are in the military, one of the things is that perfection is required. So I worked for JAG. So I served in 101st Airborne Division, JAG. I served in the 2nd Infantry Division near the DMZ at Camp Casey, JAG. I worked in criminal prosecution teams, and I worked in international affairs interfacing with the South Korean government for our status of forces agreement. I've served in the 3rd Infantry Division during the Iraq War invasion. I was there in the rear when they were going over the berm, and I was the head of claims, so paying for all the damaged things. And so I always had that job. So I've always been a desk person who just marched and went to the range once in a while and that kind of thing. And I very much, I'm American in that regard. I like rifles, I like shooting, and that kind of thing. It's just as American as is the flag. You do that here. So in that experience, one of the things is when if you're late 3 times for physical training in the morning, you can get it's almost like a misdemeanor. It's a non-judicial punishment. You can lose your rank. So simply being a minute late for formation in the morning is considered a crime. Or not, let's say crime, a non-judicial, you can get a non-judicial punishment. So you can lose your pay or something. So you live in this environment where all of the burden is on the self to become perfect. There's this misconception that people there are brainwashed and they have no opinions. There's extremely diverse opinions. Where the uniformity is perfection and focus on the mission. That's it. And if you deal with any veterans, you'll see we have a wide variety of views, and we largely don't get along with things, but we don't agree, but we all get along because we all understand a 25-year view of mission. And so everything becomes noise at that point. And I think that's why in the U.S. military in particular, it's a great place if you experience it, of ethnic and cultural diversity. And it's seamless without any, in my experience. I mean, there are people that face problems, but I think it does a very good job. And a part of it is when people are very focused on a long-term mission, they don't have time for discrimination. They don't have time for those things because the mission is so overwhelming. How can you have the bandwidth for something other than the goal? So I'll get to my point about what's so hard about the transition. When I first got to Georgia State University, and I was president of the Democrat Party for this university, and I articulated what we want to do, and people just disappeared and no one really followed up. And I was surprised, why isn't everyone doing exactly what they said they would do? And that was a big jump for me. And I found in the private sector, it's not really, there's not a mechanism to punish people for not doing what they say. So if you and I say we're going to meet at Starbucks and make a nonprofit to help recover, stray dogs, and you don't come the next Saturday, a lot of people would say you're like a regular person. A lot of people don't do it. For a veteran, they're confused and even enraged. How come you're not so disciplined? How come your words have no meaning? And getting used to that is extremely frustrating for veterans. It's very hard psychologically to come from a place where perfection is the base standard, not what you're reaching for. After you're in the military a couple of years, you have to be perfect. And it becomes the starting point, not the end goal. And so when you get out, it's very hard that people just do and say whatever they want and words don't have meaning. And it takes a lot of patience to learn to deal with that. And the other thing is that veterans do face a lot of discrimination. It's a fact. I've had people say, are you stable or this kind of stuff? And it's a very unpleasant job that people do to get advantage over people and to have power over them. And in the VA hospital, also because the military is hierarchical, a lot of people that work at the VA hospital are former military. Some of them treat veterans very well. Some of them treat them not so well. And that is the sad part about that culture. Especially like if they're a civilian and they are in charge of testing your hearing and they think that you're still a soldier, so you're just a number, so they don't pay a lot of attention to you, and there's that cultural problem. I think that my military taught me really apprehensive to any kind of egalitarian culture. We had this one soldier who drove a Hummer, right? And everyone thought, well, I know his pay, so there's no way for him to afford that. And my answer was, it's none of your business. Why are you even looking at what he owns? How come it bothers you? So I always thought, like, if my neighbor owned a Mercedes and I couldn't afford a car, that's fantastic. I'm excited for them. I want to learn how to get that car. I don't want to take it from them. And so
this is what makes you special, Kevin, is that you see opportunity as opposed to emotional things like jealousy, envy, and the other words that fit into that category. Opportunity is all around. Yes, it does sound like the military is a little bit institutional in a way. I have a lot of I worked on a military base for about 5 years. In the civilian side, not as a military person, but as a civilian side. And yes, I made a lot of. I still have a lot of friends who are in the military, yeah, there is sort of an acknowledgement that you get institutionalized after a while, and it's after you do your 7 years mandatory, which is what your normal contract is in Australia. It's about a 7-year contract you sign up for. The quit rate is very low after that. They get caught in a cyclical loop, and it just gets harder and harder to get out. And maybe they get a house, but by then you're 50, and you're trained, you're specialized, and you have all your friends, your connections. You've probably got a wife by then and some kids, and you probably want them to go in because it's a safe place, and it is a bit institutionalizing, and there's nothing good about that, and there's nothing wrong about that. It's kind of a lifestyle choice, and it's better in countries like ours, where it's a non-compulsory military service. It's a choice. I don't like the idea of conscription. I think there would be certain points where, for some countries, conscription might be a necessary object. On very rare occasions, but for the most part, free peoples and democratic peoples definitely should not be subjected to conscription. Absolutely not. I don't agree with that. What do you think? Do you agree with that, or you disagree fully, or?
I think that countries have to do what works for them. So South Korea, it's a really big part of their culture, and it's a form of like bonding for men in particular. So that's their culture, that's their system. If you're a Korean male and you didn't serve in the military, you will be treated very badly for the rest of your career by the other men who did. So that's
it's only 2 years service there, right?
Yes, and
Yeah.
and like it's such a big thing that if you try to skip it, they would try to hunt you down no matter where you are in the world. It's very serious for them, and they don't tolerate it. That's their system, and that's unique to them. I think just on that topic, one of the things I learned traveling the world is that every country should be entitled to run things how they want. It only matters when they're trying to impact the world order, right? And the world order is like the WTO or, the principles that guide United Nations and human rights and those kind of things. And so as long as we have a rough framework and we're not trying to change that, then, let bygones be bygones. And the other condition, of course, is that they're not like ruling by intimidation and threat. So I'm a big proponent of that no matter what system you have, it cannot retain its power by fear or fear of being in the outgroup. So even though some societies have a democratic framework and they have some human rights, it's held together by, well, yes, I can express myself, but what is the consequence to me if I don't? And if there is a fear of consequence that's forcing you to behave a certain way, I think eventually it fails. That's just a metaphysical view that I have towards that topic. That all things that are not natural and that arrive out of a choice to want to have something fail.
Mm. Yeah,
and so you could have a very libertarian leaning in that regard.
Yeah, that's
or
really
individualist.
That's really interesting. So we're running out of time, but let's quickly just go over something else. So you studied international relations. So did I. I find IR great. I love IR. I think it's one of the better subjects you can do. I actually think about people in terms of IR sometimes. How like they have their own constitutions.
It's the topic of generals, right? And what's more exciting than that?
Yeah. So I know that you ran as a Democrat. You're now excited about Andrew Yang, who's just dropped out. Breaking news, by the way, everyone. So hopefully that's good news for us here at Detonation, because as you know, Benzion 2020 debate is coming up in 19 days. So hopefully Andrew Yang can go to that debate. That would be great. But I'm interested in your analysis there from the United States. The United States seems to be withdrawing. The drawbridge is going up. The United States are becoming a little bit more isolated. Trump is trying to pull people out of pull back a little bit on the international scene. Are there any candidates across the slate of candidates you're excited about for their IR? I know Andrew Yang doesn't really have an IR strategy, but if he does, clarify and tell us. But is there anyone you're really excited about? And if not,
actually published a really well-written foreign policy that was hawkish where it needed to be hawkish and thoughtful where it needed to be thoughtful, and it was full of carrot and very brutal stick where necessary. It was extremely well done. I think it was published in CFR or something like that.
Oh, okay.
But
I'll have to look it up. I didn't see that. I love CFR.
I personally categorize it as a little bit closer to Obama's foreign policy, only with more teeth and staking out threat. But that's not because of a different team in Obama. There's more information that has transpired over time to inform the policy. But I don't really, for right now, it's interesting because this is my real first election since returning to the U.S. I arrived right when Trump was elected, but I wasn't really a part of the process. I had just got back here that October to the U.S. after being gone for 10 years. And I look at it through a very different lens. I look at it from where I want the U.S. to be in 25 or 50 years. I suppose I got that long view from living in Northeast Asia for a long time. And I see a lot of focus on the next 4 years and 8 years and satisfying these super high expectations. And I would rather have candidates focus on where they want the United States to arrive 25 years later and focus on those policies today on a very slow turtle-like path towards it. I think that the worst thing the United States can do right now is make radical changes, because radical change also undermines investor certainty. And so then capital will leave. The more a country changes its policies, the worse of an investment environment it becomes. People think that high tax rates and low tax rates are determined capital flows. That's not true. Singapore, I think, has 15 or 17% tax rate, but they have more wealth managed than any offshore domicile. Why is that? because in Singapore is extremely certain. And then of offshore domiciles, why is the Caymans the most preferred? What's the difference between the Caymans and British Virgin Islands, or Seychelles, or Gibraltar, or Bermuda? So the reason is in the Caymans, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on it, they give you a 30-year guarantee there will be no policy change. So what investors look for is certainty. And right now, I think there are a lot of systemic issues in the United States that have to be corrected. I think this selling IP to get market access has to stop. I think that the Americans should be willing to show teeth and realize that they're in the upper position. What is the U.S. GDP? Anyone know that? I think it's like 18 trillion or something.
22, I think.
20 trillion? Yeah. And even though it's not the perfect metric, it still has massive power, more than any unrivaled in the world. But if you speak with Americans, sometimes lately they speak like they have no self-esteem, no self-confidence, and have nothing. And if you behave like that, then you're not going to exercise the tools you have. You know, when I was overseas, and if someone in a meeting bullied me or behaved even remotely impolite, I would contact the embassy, or I will ask for the FBI attaché and just come down with a hammer, meeting one. So you have to learn how to utilize these tools, and you have less to worry about. But I think that there is an unfortunate problem of Americans having a really low self-esteem. And I think some of it is just a narrative that kind of went amok. It's not justified. I don't really believe in nationalism at all. I think it's a horrible thing. I think that nationalism is defined as thinking that your culture is uniquely better than another. I certainly don't believe that at all. For me, it's a very selfish thing. So there's a certain world that I'm comfortable living in terms of my rights to insult their leader, in terms of the certainty I want from my business counterparts because of the rule of law, and my right to disagree without consequence in the private sector and personal sectors, because it's just an opinion. I should be able to grow. And I want to make sure that the world we live in 25 years later is exactly like that.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
That's the biggest champion of that, so that's the force I back.
Yeah, it's about allowing those it's about creating the conditions for those ideas to thrive, and that unique ability to thrive. And I think that's what America is really good at. America is really good at saying to everybody, here's a level playing field, everybody can play on the playing field. Of course, they like I said, they gave themselves a little bit of an elevated position, and arguably they could have taken it because there was nobody else after World War II except for the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union's gone now, and the world is really facing this a dualistic idea. You can either go the China route or you can go the American route, and that's it now. I mean, China is kind of the new oppositional state of, it's this resurgent sort of the Soviet Union in a way. It's not as big and powerful as the Soviet Union was at its height, in a certain respect.
When you analyze post-authoritarian societies from a sociological level, they have a lot of trauma. So you can bully someone into not telling you you're an idiot. You can do that as a rich person, right? You can be an investor and say, I might give you some money to your company, but here are my political views. Well, what does that tell the person asking for the money? Not to disagree with you, right? Or you won't get their money. And this is a really short-sighted behavior, which you definitely see these alternative, murdering people in our way economic models and intimidating kind of thing, is that you can try to control people's behavior, but eventually there is blowback. And the US has also learned these lessons, right? So it's really important to have a long view and to think about things from a game theoretic view. And these countries that are trying to control people's behavior, they're going to create a lot of trauma in them, because people will smile, they will tell the government what they want to hear, and all that will happen is they will get really good at lying. You can't change someone's beliefs by intimidating them into agreeing with you. They're just going to lie to you. You know, in South Korea before '88, you went to a political prison if you said something that was very against the regime. Same thing for North Korea. All that people learn to do is not tell you their opinions. Yep. And so yeah, if this thing that I'm going to exercise power now and I'm going to make you agree with me, it's delusional. It's like no delayed gratification. It's going to fail, and eventually people get upset. And there's a point kind of like when there's a market correction on an inelastic demand product. Eventually it blows up, just like it did in oil in 2008. So oil is a very inelastic in demand, and so it took a real big pressure point to pop the price to 147 nominal dollars a barrel, which was a real market price, not from manipulation. It went straight up because the demand was inelastic and it wasn't correcting for a shortage of capacity at 1 million barrels globally then, which was too thin to support it at the current price. But because demand wasn't moving, eventually it just had to go straight up to fix it. And that's what happens to populations. You can corner them, you can bully them into saying what they want, and then in Korean 87, what happened? They had a massive protest and popped. And so, like I said, everything has to be organic. The other thing I'll leave with, when people ask me my political view, one of my mentors in South Korea taught me, I'm a very idealistic person. And he said to me, Kevin, maybe you don't get to enjoy these things in your life, but your children do, or your grandchildren. What I would ask the current generation is to think that maybe I'm not important. Maybe my life is meant to serve my children or grandchildren. So maybe the world, America is very imperfect. We have tons of issues. Maybe they don't get solved in 4 years. Maybe they get solved in 300. It's very important to have a very long view so that we stay calm and focused. And the shorter and shorter term we want to fix everything, it's very important to fix things. But it's also important to have let's look back in history. How long does it take and how long to go forward? We should never ask people to be impatient when they're being mistreated or injustice. But at the same time, we cannot, we have to be extremely game theoretic and thoughtful in our strategy, right? In this process. So
you can build a very,
what I say to politicians is stop lying to people in terms of promising something in 4 years that you're only deferring their frustration to the next person to deal with. Because they keep raising expectations. I think the best thing to do is lower everybody's expectations and say, this is hard, there is no immediate solution, and we want help. How about a political leader that says, I want help? That would be amazing.
And that is why that's what Andrew Yang was doing. Andrew Yang was saying, there's systemic problems here with the system, and it's not the Democrats' fault. It's not Trump's fault. Trump's just the symptom of a problem. And here is some practical solutions to fixing some of these systemic problems. I was going to say, you can build a beautiful wooden bridge, very beautiful looking wooden bridge to cross a river, but it's gonna go away when there's a flood, right? But if you build a stone bridge, a practical stone bridge, might take a little bit longer, might be a little bit more investment, but it's gonna hold when the flood comes. Jesus said the same thing about building a house on the sand. You can build a very quick, beautiful house on the sand, but it's gonna get washed away and it's gonna fall off. But if you build your house on the correct foundations, you got a longer life of the product there, right?
I'm not an ideological person, so I just want to close that since you've kind of pushed me on a lot of pressure points and maybe discuss. I care deeply in my heart about where that arrives in 100 years and 1,000 years. And I believe that if society is going to come together and become one, it has to do it organically. It cannot be engineered because we have a lot to learn from each other. And the more we try to engineer it, the more we try to control it, the more it's going to go the wrong direction. I think that humans, ecosystems are extremely fragile. You can't engineer a good society. You have to learn how to treat each other. If you keep mistreating people in business, that local culture, if it's here in Seattle or it's in Seoul or it's where you live, the city has its own culture and business. And after hundreds of years, they start to change and adjust for bad behaviors. And they develop new norms. Norms are the most sustainable future for them. We can kickstart it with some institutional protections and rule of law, but then society on its own has got to figure its stuff out and establish their norms and their process to go forward. I like Mark Twain's quote on, essentially I can't quote it exactly, but traveling is the death of bigotry and prejudice. But it's also the thing that humbles the crap out of you. And it's also the thing that shows you when you go, it's easy when you visit a country to see BS. And they cannot see it themselves sometimes. And it's the same for when I return to the US. It's really hard for Americans to see the things that they're being screwed on. And it's the same for Chinese people. They cannot see that so easily themselves where they're being lied to. I think in China's story, the biggest thing is that they rose themselves out of poverty, and the CCP had little to do with it. And I think that's why there is a great future for China. But it's not the CCP's to create it for any more than Democrat or Republican. I think Americans have a very anti-government culture. and there are there are endearing aspects of that, and they're not. But for us, the greatest insult is to say the government did it. We kind of look at them as like this administrator that we use that's a good tool, but they're not ever going to take credit for it. Because when you take credit for things, there's a little bit of ego involved. And that's always crap when people do that, you know? I guess I learned that in Korea. They really look down on people that say, I did this and that. And sometimes you have to, because people underestimate you, and you have to like slap them around and let them know that, you know, actually I did all these things and I was just being super humble. But, you know.
Yeah. No, it's so true. Well, you know what, Kevin Kane, thank you so much coming on Detonation. We got a lot more to talk about too, and I know you've got a lot of projects you want to talk about as well. Fascinating. You're really, really good character. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I want to talk to you a lot more about. I want to get your thoughts on transhumanism. I want to get more of your thoughts on AI and emerging technology as well. These things are huge, and technological change, because you know, how do you do this slow, steady approach that you're talking about, which is admirable, but in a really rapidly changing world, you know, where we've got a lot of ethical issues coming down the pipeline, as well as a lot of environmental energy issues. I'm really excited that you know a lot about oil too, and hydrocarbons. That's a huge space there. It's really exciting. So I just got to thank Thrivous for helping us out here. Thank you very much, Thrivous, as always, for sponsoring this episode. So if you're in the comments or if you're watching this video, you know what to do. You got 24 hours. Share it out. Kevin, you can do it too. More people that share, the more money you're going to win. That's the best deal ever, right? Also, I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters. That's Chairman Gennady Stolirov II. We are organizing regular broadcast time with the chairman and or a USTP member every week, at least once a week at this point. So when you drop in, we're going to be able to have a regular time with the chairman. So that's really, really, really good. So you know, more USTP. That's what we always want. Thank you, Mr. Shoemaker, as always, Mr. Shoemaker, and I hope you're. I'm not sure whether he's in New Zealand yet, but fly safe and all that. And Mike DeVerde, the super fan, thank you very much, Mike. And also, I Am Transhuman, thank you very much for sponsoring this episode as well. Kevin, thank you as well. You're the superstar of the show. I had a great time, and I really want to look forward to talking more about it, and Senior Technology Officer as well, to talk about cryptography if they want to do that as well. More than welcome.
Yes. Please pre-register at www.ambitvpn.com. I just tested it on AT&T's network, and I increased my download speed from 4 megabits per second to 28 because our technology prevents throttling. So if you are using mobile gaming or you want faster because you're being throttled, then go to our website and pre-register at www.ambitvpn.com. And big shout out to my CTO and co-founder, Andrew McElroy. I call him he can do magic, and he's amazing. He's the most gifted person I've ever worked with, and most genuine. And then my other colleague, Scott Brower, former Navy SEAL, retired.
Cool. So we'll put those links in the description. So if you jump on and have a look at that, the link is in the description. What's the website again?
www.ambitvpn.com. AMBIT.
Ambit VPN.
Like the boundary of something, yeah.
All right, thank you very much. We'll leave that link in the description. Everybody should go there. If you want faster internet, no throttling, Ambit VPN. Thank you very much, Ken McCain. You've been fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Detonation.